Welcome to the Pharmaceutical Technology Podcast, Data Integrity from a Data Management Perspective. This podcast is brought to you by LabVantage Solutions, a leading provider of laboratory informatics solutions that transform data into the knowledge that drives better outcomes. To find out more, please go to labvantage.com. And now, here's your host for this podcast, the Senior Editor of Special Projects for Pharmaceutical Technology, Amber Lowry.
Hello, everyone. This is Amber Lowry, the Senior Editor of Special Projects for Pharmaceutical Technology, and I'm here with Bob Volkner, Vice President of Sales and Marketing at LabVantage Solutions. Thank you for being here today, Bob.
Thank you, Amber. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. So let's get started. What is data integrity? Is there one agreed definition or view? And does it only cover electronic data?
Yeah, data integrity can apply to any method of recording data. So it does apply to paper records, but primarily industry drivers are for electronic records. So the definition I like best is that data integrity is the overall accuracy, completeness, and consistency of data. It also refers to the safety of data in regard to regulatory compliance and security. So when the integrity of data is secure, the information stored in the database will remain complete, accurate, and reliable no matter how long it's stored or how often it's accessed. Data integrity also ensures that data is safe from any outside forces.
What's behind regulatory efforts to maintain data integrity? And what's the historical perspective that led to this?
So for many years, I know that organizations have been moving away from paper-based systems and even Excel-based record keeping to more comprehensive electronic systems. And as these systems became more evolved and relied upon, what we call the system of record is the electronic repository. So companies and organizations are making critical decisions using the data that's in these repositories. But unfortunately, there's been documented issues discovered during regulatory audits in regard to integrity of this data. So there are cases where data was deceptively maintained, like hiding or changing bad data, or there were issues of inadequate processes, like entering data incorrectly or incompletely. So back in the 90s, the FDA had produced some guidelines covering electronic records and electronic signatures to address the proper use of electronic systems. And then later in the early 2000s, they refined these guidelines to offer a more risk-based approach to compliance. Starting in 2016, the FDA and other international agencies like the UK's MHRA, the European Medicines Agency, and the WHO all recognized that there were problems, and they individually issued guidelines on data integrity.
So with that being said, is it still a challenge today? And if so, why? What do current transgressions look like?
Yeah, so there are still many processes used in the lab at many organizations that rely on aging legacy LIMS systems or other computer-based systems that don't really adequately adhere to the current regulatory guidelines. We continue to see that the FDA has increasingly observed violations in the lab involving data integrity during inspections. So a high majority of the warning letters issued deal with data integrity. So if we use the FDA as an example, I know that they expect processes to be designed so that data, when created and maintained, cannot be modified without a record of the modification. Data is also more than just the final result. It is all of the metadata that describes that result. Metadata, what I mean by that is it's data that describes the results. So it's all the information about the result itself and puts it in context. So the FDA says it's not acceptable to record data, as an example, on a piece of paper that will be discarded after the data has been transcribed to a permanent record, like a notebook or into a LIMS. Therefore, you must document or save the data at the time of the performance, when the data is generated. This, in many cases, is not happening in a lot of labs.
So how does a laboratory information management system, or LIMS, help with data integrity? What part of the drug discovery to development to manufacturing continuum does LIMS control or contribute to?
So LIMS are an integral part of the modern connected laboratory. So starting in discovery onto development and finally into manufacturing, LIMS is the system of record for all data. We have many customers that use our platform throughout this continuum, and LIMS is responsible for properly capturing, documenting, controlling, and maintaining all data, supporting data integrity compliance and compliance in general. LIMS can have proper controls in place to control and document data as it's captured, either directly from lab instruments or manually at the keyboard. For manually entered data, these controls start as soon as a technician touches the keyboard, even if they don't submit what they've entered into the database. And the FDA actually calls this out in their guidance. It's what they call temporary memory.
Are cloud-hosted or software as a service, also known as SaaS, deployments a concern for data integrity, particularly in the pharmaceutical industry?
Yeah, so hosting LIMS in the cloud for us has been very common for more than 5 years now. The pharmaceutical industry, like others, sees great value in hosting business critical systems such as LIMS in the cloud. We have some older clients, as an example, who started with on-premise LIMS and are now rehosting on the cloud. So cloud hosting can actually provide greater levels of security, redundancy, fault tolerance, and disaster recovery than many systems hosted on-premise. SaaS LIMS is not new either, but its use in the pharmaceuticals is. There is a desire for this to be maintained in a validated solution under SaaS, and that's somewhat problematic. And there are issues with compliance with multi-tenant systems. We're working on actually some product changes and, more importantly, the ongoing and continual validation services required when on SaaS.
So, are most data integrity efforts about prevention or rather intervention? For example, catching bad actors or bad processes?
Well, it should really be both. Having proper processes in place increases the level of data integrity that regulatory agencies are looking for to enforce and to provide greater confidence in the use of data. LIMS is the system of record for lab data, and when forcing proper controls and procedures at the point the data is generated will ensure this compliance. The more we automate data capture directly from data generating devices like lab instrumentation and other systems, the lower the bad actor risk will be.
Interesting. So, all that considered, what questions should pharma companies ask solution providers to be certain they're doing everything possible to ensure data integrity?
The pharma companies really should look first inwardly to be sure that they understand the regulatory guidelines and determine if they have any level of risk in their current operations. This may sound really obvious, but I see gaps and issues in many organizations I visit and work with. Many of the warning letters issued by the FDA deal with data integrity issues, so the problem is certainly there. When looking for a LIMS provider to partner with, I would confirm that the vendor has a strong track record of serving the pharmaceutical industry and fully understands regulatory compliance and specifically data integrity issues. Everyone is talking about this, but not all are fully prepared for it, both on the vendor side and on the consumer side. A LIMS solution needs to be comprehensive and includes not only the study, batch, sample, test, lifecycle management that LIMS offers, but should also include an embedded change management capability to document and audit changes to master data, things like test methods and specifications and so forth. An embedded laboratory execution system for procedural conformance during testing execution, an electronic lab notebook for researchers' use, an SDMS, which stands for Scientific Data Management System for collecting, storing, and protecting all data, not just the results, and an embedded investigations feature for documenting deviations. Lastly, the solution should be pre-configured for use and include pre-executed validation evidence to save time and cost and lower overall project list risk.
Great. Thank you for that informative overview, Bob. We truly appreciate you being here today.
Oh, thank you for having me. It's been my pleasure.
This has been Amber Lowry, the Senior Editor of Special Projects for Pharmaceutical Technology, and thanks to all for listening.
You've been listening to the Pharmaceutical Technology Podcast, Data Integrity from a Data Management Perspective. This podcast is brought to you by LabVantage Solutions, a leading provider of laboratory informatics solutions that transform data into the knowledge that drives better outcomes. To find out more, please go to labvantage.com.